B'siyata d'shmaya, we're going to learn Taanit Daf Chavov. We're going to start from the Mishnah at the beginning of the next perek. Says the Mishnah, B'shloisha prokim bashana. 3 times a year, Koyanim noisim eskapeim. The Koyanim, they do birkas Koyanim. It's called noisim eskapeim. They lift up their hands because that is how the Koyanim do birkas Koyanim. And they do this at the end of the Chazaras Hashatz of the Tfilos. Arba pomim bayom. And of those 3 times, one of them, they actually even do birchas kohanim 4 times a year, 4 times a day. That's how the Gemara is going to explain this. B'shachris, and that one time in the year when there's 4 times in the day, birchas kohanim is actually Yom Kippur, where one does the birchas kohanim by shachris, b'musaf, b'mincha, or b'ne'ilas she'orim. It's what we call ne'ilah. And there's a discussion exactly what these gates, the Ne'ilah means the closing, which gates are closing. Is it the time when the gates of the Beis HaMikdash were being closed at the end of the day? Or was it the gates of heaven that get closed after the daily tefillas have been said? And while these 3 times in the year that one does Birchas Kohanim, B'tainiyos, that's on the fast days, and in particular we're talking here about the fast days that were decreed and declared when rain didn't come down or other calamities like that. Uba ma'amodois, which we're going to learn about in a minute, the ma'amodois, uba yom kippurim, and on Yom Kippur. Elohein ha'ma'amodois. These are the ma'amodois. And the Mishnah is going to immediately tell us what's the source of ma'amodois, what are ma'amodois. And the halachas of the ma'amodis was that these Anshe Maimad, we'll soon see who they are, they would fast, and in their cities they would daven that the korbanos that were being brought up on behalf of their brethren, the entire Klal Yisrael, should be well received in Shemaim. Lefi shenemar, since it says in the Pasuk, Tzaves b'nei Yisrael es korboni lachmi. And that, which means that the korban tomid would be brought every single day from the money, from those shkolim that were brought by each and every person within Klal Yisrael. And we know that when a korban is being brought, then the person who owns the korban has to be present by the korban. And therefore they appointed certain representatives in all their places that they would represent, so to speak, the people who would be standing on their behalf when the korbanos were being brought. The Mishnah says, how can a person's korban be brought and he's not standing there? And therefore, the very early prophets, Shmuel HaNovi and David HaMelech, they set up Esrim v'arba mishmoris. They split up the Kohanim into 24 different groups. Al kol mishmor u'mishmor hoyo maimed b'Yerushalayim. And that means these 24 groups, they had a cycle that approximately twice a year they went through this cycle. Every week was a different group, was a different mishmar. And every week, corresponding to the Kohanim and Leviim, that they had their groups that would go to the Beis HaMikdash and work that week in the Beis HaMikdash, there would also be Yisraelim that were also split up. The Rambam says that the Ksherim, only certain people who are with a lot of Yiras Shemaim, they were chosen to represent in the various cities. They would represent the people of all of Klal Yisrael, and they would also be davening on behalf of these korbanos. And these people, these Anshe HaMishmor, the Anshe HaMa'amodos, more accurately, those who were in Yerushalayim, would actually be present when the korban was being brought. So I'll call Mishmar u'Mishmar hoyo maimed b'Yerushalayim shel Kohanim shel Leviim v'shel Yisraelim. That every week there was a group of Kohanim and Leviim who actually did the avodah. The Kohanim did the avodah, the Leviim did the singing, and the Yisraelim, they were there representing Klal Yisrael to be present at the korban when the korban was brought. And besides for that, there was in all the other cities all over the place, there were also ma'amodos. There were people, Yisraelim, that it was their job to actually daven that the korbanos that are being brought on behalf of Klal Yisrael would be received. And they also had their groups that changed every week, and they were the Anshe HaMaimed. So we had the Anshe HaMishmor that were Kohanim and Leviim in the Beis HaMikdash. We had the Anshe HaMaimud that were Yisraelim that was split into two. There was the group that was in Yerushalayim, and there's the group that was in all the other places. And these Anshe HaMamodos, they would actually have to fast during their week. We'll soon see when and how, but they would fast during their week, and they would fast and daven, as we're going to see. Higia Zman HaMishmor Lalos, at the time when the next shift at the beginning of the week, when the shift started in Yerushalayim, then Kohanim and Leviim oilim Yerushalayim, the Kohanim and the Leviim would go up to Yerushalayim, those Kohanim and Leviim, that it was their week, their shift to work in the Beis HaMikdash, the Yisrael Sheba'osei Mishmor, and the Yisraelim that were associated to that group, Niskansin La'orim or Ba'orim, they would gather together and daven together in their respective cities. V'koirin b'maaseh bereshis, and there would be a special Kriyas HaTorah, and that Kriyas HaTorah they would learn. We'll soon see what they would read, but they would have a special Kriyas HaTorah. V'anshe HaMaimud hoyu misanim, and these Yisraelim all over the place, they would fast, but not every day of the week. Arba yomim b'shavua, 4 days in the week. Obviously the days, not the nights. Miyom sheni v'ad yom chamishi. Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, they would fast. V'lo hayu misanim erev Shabbos, they would not fast on Friday, mipnei kvod Shabbos, in honor of Shabbos, not to come into Shabbos starving. V'lo be'echad b'Shabbos, nor did they fast on Sunday, kadei shelo yetzu mimenucha v'oineg leyegia, in order not to have an immediate transition between extra tainug and pleasure to the pain and affliction of fasting, v'tainis, v'yamusu, and that's not so healthy. Continues the Mishnah, that regarding the Kriyas HaTorah that they would read on these Mamodos, then b'yom HaRishon on Sundays they would read, that means the Mishnah is now going to tell us that they would read every day of the week, the day that corresponds to that day in Masechet Bereshis. We know in the first perek of Parashas Bereshis, we have the Masechet Bereshis, what Hashem created on the 6 days of the week, and Vayichulu on Shabbos. But since 3 people are called up to the Torah, and every person can only be called up to the Torah if one reads a minimum of 3 psukim, there's no single parasha within that first perek in Parashas Bereshis which has 9 psukim, and therefore every day they would have to read that day's parasha. That means Sunday would read Sunday's in Masechet Bereshis and Monday. The longer of the two would be split into 2, and the shorter one would be just 1. So b'yom HaRishon on Sundays they would read Bereshis, which is a parasha of 5 psukim, and they would actually split that into 2. And even though it's not possible to 2 people read 5 psukim and have 3 psukim each, so that the Gemara is going to discuss how one can read the 5 psukim with giving 2 people 3 psukim each. And also they would read V'hirokia, which is the second day of Masechet Bereshis. They would read that on Sunday as well. It's a parasha with just 3 psukim, and that would be the third person who gets the aliyah. That would be his aliyah. B'sheni on Mondays they would read V'hirokia, which is the kriya of the second day. It's only 3 psukim there, so it's only the first aliyah will read that parasha. V'yikovu Hamayim, which again, Yikovu Hamayim, which is Tuesday's Masechet Bereshis, has 5 psukim, and they again split that into 2 people who get an aliyah. B'shlishi on Tuesdays, Yikovu Hamayim, they read Yikovu Hamayim, but this time they call up just 1 person to read all the 5 psukim. They don't split it into 2, because Vayhi Ma'oros, which is the 4th day of creation, actually has 6 psukim, which can easily be split into 2, 3 psukim each. Therefore, Yikovu Hamayim is 1 person, and V'hi Ma'oros is 2 people. But Rabbi on Wednesdays, V'hi Ma'oros, they would now read V'hi Ma'oros again with 6 psukim, splitting it into 2. V'yishutzu Hamayim, which is the parasha of the 5th day of creation, which only has 4 psukim in it, and therefore only 1 person gets an aliyah when that is read. B'chamishi on Thursdays, Yishrutzu Hamayim, the first aliyah is Yishrutzu Hamayim, which is 4 psukim. V'atoytzei Oretz, the second and third aliyah, is the parasha of V'atoytzei Oretz, which is Friday's creation, which has 8 psukim in and can easily be split into 2. B'shishi on Fridays, V'atoytzei Oretz, they would read V'atoytzei Oretz, which is 2 people, Vayichulu Hashemayim, and the reading of Shabbos, which is Vayichulu, they would read, is the third aliyah on Friday, which is one parasha of 3 psukim. Parasha Gedola Koirenoisa B'Shnayim, the 6 psukim parashas or the 8 psukim parashas, and sometimes the 5 psukim parashas get split into 2. V'Aktano, and the small parashas having 3 or 4 psukim, and sometimes even 5 psukim, B'Yochid is split and has only 1 aliyah. And this is true B'Shachris and B'Musaf. B'Shachris, that was Kriyas HaTorah, they would read this, and with Musaf, those days that had Musaf, they would read Musaf on with this Kriyas HaTorah as well. However, b'mincha, in regards to the davening of mincha, nichnosim, they would gather together, v'koirin al piem, they would read it by heart. They wouldn't take out a Sefer Torah and read from the Sefer Torah inside. K'koirin es Shema, like one reads the Shema, that one doesn't take out a Sefer Torah, they just read the parashas by heart. Erev Shabbos b'mincha, on Friday afternoon, mincha lo hoyu nichnosim, they would not gather together for this tefillah, mipnei kvoida Shabbos, because of kavod of Shabbos. Continues the Mishnah, Kol yoim sheyesh by Halil. Any day that one would say Halil on those days, for example, on Chanukah and many other days, on Rosh Chodesh, ein by Maimud b'Shachris. Then since they would be engaged in saying Shachris, then those people, the Ma'amodos, those Yisraelim who were in Yerushalayim, they were engaged and busy saying Halil, and therefore they would not say the Ma'amodos, they wouldn't say the Tefillah, that the Tefillahs of the Korbanos should be niskabel, should be received and well accepted in Shemaim. They wouldn't do that by Shachris. Korban Musaf, those days that have Musaf, then ein boy b'ne'ilah. Then those days that one says Musaf, and the Musaf takes much longer, it's more than just a Korban Tomid, which is 1 Korban. A Musaf is always a few Korbanis. Then in Yerushalayim, those people in Yerushalayim would not say the Ma'amodos, not during Ne'ilah, even not during Mincha, and even more so not during Musaf. Which means those days where there was a Korban Musaf, then by Musaf, Mincha and Ne'ilah, they would not say the Ma'amodos. Korban Eitzim, a day where they would bring the korban called Korban Eitzim, where the certain families would bring a wood as a donation to the Mizbeach. We'll soon see which families brought and when they brought, but it was a Yom Tov for them. And on those days, Ein B'Mincha, they would not say in Yerushalayim, they would not say the Maimud during Mincha. However, during the Ilah, that they could say. Divi Rabbi Akiva, that was the opinion of Rabbi Akiva. Omar loy ben Azai. Ben Azai argued with Rabbi Akiva and said, Kachoy Rabbi Shua Shoin. Rabbi Shua learned and taught that Korban Musaf ein b'mincha, that a day that there's a Musaf, then not like we said, not like you Rabbi Akiva said before, that when there's a Musaf, that you don't say the Ne'ilah, you don't say the Ma'amodos by Musaf, Mincha and Ne'ilah, rather just by the Musaf and Mincha, but by Ne'ilah you do say the Ma'amodos. And Korban Eitzim, and the day that they would bring the Korban Eitzim, then not like you, Rabbi Akiva said, that by Mincha you don't say the Ma'amodos, rather Ein b'Ne'ilah you don't say the Ma'amodos by Ne'ilah. Chozer Rabbi Akiva liyeshenike ben Azai, afterwards when Rabbi Akiva heard what Ben Azai had said, Rabbi Akiva adopted the version of Ben Azai in the name of Rabbi Yeshua. Continues the Gemara. Zman atzei koyanim v'ha'om tisha. There were 9 times when the koyanim or other families in Klal Yisrael would actually come and donate the woods. And this was primarily that after the 70 years between the 2 Batei Mikdash, these were the families that first volunteered to bring the wood when it was most needed, when they rebuilt the second Beis HaMikdash. And therefore they had the privilege, this was their day, and all their descendants in the generations later, they would bring the wood to the Beis HaMikdash on those days. Be'echod b'Nisan, on the 1st of Nisan, Bnei Orach ben Yehuda. They were the first ones to volunteer to bring and to donate wood to the Beis HaMikdash, and they did that on the 1st of Nisan, and that lasted until the 20th of Tammuz, and therefore that was the 1st of Nisan, was the Yom Tov of this family of Orach ben Yehuda. Be'esrim b'Tammuz, on the 20th of Tammuz, Bnei David ben Yehuda, that is when the sons of David ben Yehuda, this was descendants of David HaMelech, that they were the ones that brought the wood. B'chamisha b'av, on the 5th of Av, b'nei Parush ben Yehuda, it was the turn of Parush ben Yehuda. B'shiva boy, on the 7th of Av, b'nei Yoinodov ben Rechev. B'asara boy, on the 10th of Av, b'nei Sono ben Binyamin. B'chamisha also boy, on the 15th of Av, it was b'nei Zatu ben Yehuda. V'imoem Koyanim, and with them were the Koyanim, and Leviim v'chol mi shetor b'shivtoi, or anyone who didn't know which tribe they belonged to, they would also take part in this Korban Eitzim. And that means that anybody who Koyanim, Leviim, or anybody who didn't know when their time, that means which of these families, if they had a tradition in the family that we are descendants of a family that would bring the wood to the Beis HaMikdash, but we don't know which family we belong to, they would all join in on the 15th of Av together with Zatu ben Yehuda. And with them was also Bnei Goinve Eli, the families of those that used to smuggle the grinding tools, or Bnei Koitze Ktzios, and those who would cut the figs. That was what would happen on the 15th of Av. Be'esrim boy, on the 20th of Av, Bnei Pachas Moyov ben Yehuda. That was the family of the Pachas Moyov ben Yehuda. Be'esrim be'elul, on the 20th of Elul, Bnei Adin ben Yehuda. Be'echod be'teves, on the 1st of Teves, Shovu Bnei Parush Shnia. That is when the family of Parush that was already mentioned before, that they were the ones that were on the 15th of Av, they were the ones who would again bring on the 1st of Teves. And we're going to discuss all this in the Gemara later. Be'echod be'teves, the Mishnah says on the 1st of Teves, Lo hoya boy maimed, they didn't do the maimed at all, shehoya boy halil, v'korban musaf, v'korban eitzim. There was also Halil because it was Rosh Chodesh and Chanukah. There was also a korban musaf because it was Rosh Chodesh. There's also a korban eitzim, as we just saw now, the be'echod be'teves, the Bnei Parush, they would bring the woods. So you had all three reasons, and therefore they did not say the mamodos at all on the 1st of Teves. Continues the Mishnah. Chamisha dvarim irues aviseinu b'shiva asa b'tamuz. V'chamisha b'tisha b'av. We know that Shiva asa b'tamuz is a fast day, as well as Tisha b'av. And there are 5 things that happened on the 17th of Tammuz, and 5 things that happened on the 9th of Av. B'shiva asa b'tamuz, what are the 5 things that happened on the 17th of Tammuz? Nishtabru aluchos, Moshe Rabbeinu broke the luchos then, ubatel hatomid, and the korban tomid stopped. And there's discussion in the Mefarshim exactly at what point in history, what era we're talking about here of the korban tomid, but there were a number of times that the korban tomid was stopped, and at least one of them was on the 17th of Tammuz. Another thing, v'huvka ha'ir, the city of Yerushalayim got breached. Another thing, v'saraf apostamos esatera, apostamos, he burnt a Sefer Torah, v'hemit tzelem behechal, and Menashe placed an Avodah Zarah in the Heichal. Those were 5 calamities that all happened on the 17th of Tammuz. B'Tisha B'av, what are the 5 things that happened on the 9th of Av? Nigzar al aviseinu shlo yikonsu la'oretz, after the Meraglim came back, the spies came back from Eretz Yisrael, and they said what they said, and as we know from the Chumash, and then it was decreed against Klal Yisrael that they would not be entering Eretz Yisrael. The Chorav Abayis Barishoino, the first Beis HaMikdash was destroyed on the 9th of Av, or B'Shnia, as was the second one. V'nilkada Beitar, and the city of Beitar was conquered, and everybody there was murdered. V'nechra Ha'ir, and the city of Yerushalayim was ploughed. And these are 5 calamities that happened on the 9th of Av. Mishenichnas Av, as soon as the month of Av starts, Mematim b'Simcha, we minimize with certain acts of Simcha. B'Shabbos Shechol Tisha B'av, the week in which Tisha B'av falls, Liyos B'Seicha, Asur Milesaper u'Milechabes. One's not allowed to have a haircut, nor wash one's clothes. U'B'Chamishi, in the event that Tisha B'av is on Friday, then, and there will be no time to prepare for Shabbos, then on the Thursday, the day before Tisha B'av, Mutorin, one's allowed to have a haircut and wash one's clothes, Mipnei Koyed Shabbos, in honor of Shabbos. Erev Tisha B'av, on the day before Tisha B'av, Lo Yeichal Adam Shnei Tavshilin, a person shouldn't eat in the meal. And there's a discussion if this is the whole day or just the Sudas HaMafsekes, the final meal before the onset of the fast. But he shouldn't eat 2 cooked dishes. Lo Yeichal, for example, Basar, V'lo Yishteh Yayin. he shouldn't eat meat and shouldn't drink wine. Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel Omer Yeshane, and the Gemara is going to explain what that means. Rabbi Yehuda Mechayev B'Kfiyas Hamita. Rabbi Yehuda says that on Tisha B'Av one has to turn the beds upside down, which means one doesn't sleep on a bed. And the Chachamim did not agree with him. Omer Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel. There were no Yomim Tovim, there were no good days for Klal Yisrael like the following 2 days. Kechamisha also Ba'av, like the 15th of Av, Ukeyim HaKippurim, and on Yom Kippur. Shebehen, on these 2 days, Benois Yerushalayim, the unmarried girls in Yerushalayim, Yoitzois B'Klilovon She'ulim, they would all borrow, even the wealthy ones would borrow white garments, and they would go out with them. And the reason that even the people who had garments would borrow garments, in order not to embarrass those who didn't have garments and indeed had to borrow. Since nobody knows whether the people they've borrowed the clothes from, were they nida, were they not nida, were they tomei, were they not, and therefore all these garments were toivled first. And these girls of Yerushalayim would go out, they would dance in the vineyards. They would say as follows: Bachur, an unmarried boy who's looking for a wife. Lift up your eyes. That means the very pretty girls would say, look at what you're choosing. The less pretty girls, but those that come from a more prestigious families, they would say, don't just set your eyes on beauty. You should also look and make sure that the families are good. And those that had neither, they would say sheker hachein, grace is a sheker, is a lie, vehevel hayofi, and beauty is a vain. Isha yiras Hashem hitis halal. The main virtue of a woman is that she has yiras Shemayim. V'oimer tnu lo mipri odeo, give her from the work of her hands. V'yalulua b'sha'orim ma'aseh. They'll praise her work by the gates, by the entrances. V'cheinu oimer. Tze'eno is another pasuk that says Tze'eno, you should go out to Re'eno and see B'nois Yerushalayim, B'melech Shloimo, which is referring to Hashem, B'itra, Ba'atoro, with the crown, She'itra Loi Imoi, which Klal Yisrael is, so to speak, adorning on Hashem, B'yoim Chasunosoi, or B'yoim Simchas Liboy, on the day which is compared, alluding to a marriage and a simcha from the heart. B'yoim Chasunosoi is Matan Torah. By Matan Torah, when we received the Torah, on Yom Kippur we received the second set of luchos. That was like a chasna with Hashem. That's going to be the rebuilding of the Beis Hamikdash in Yirtzeh Hashem speedily in our days. Says the Gemara that we saw at the beginning of the Mishnah that b'shloisha prokim 3 times in the year, Bashono koyanim noisim eskapeim, then the koyanim would do birchas koyanim, and we said, what are they? They are b'tainios, b'ma'amodos, and b'yoyim HaKippurim. And they would, and it says in the Mishnah, they would be noisim eskapeim arba pa'omim b'yoyim, 4 times a day, shachris, musaf, mincha, and ne'ilah. Asks the Gemara, tainis, on a regular tainis, those fast days that were decreed because of rain or other calamities, u'ma'amodos, and these mamodos, which is when the Yisraelim would gather together and daven that the korbanos of Klal Yisrael should be well received, mi'ika musaf, there was a musaf in those days, those are regular weekdays. Answers the Gemara, you're right. Chisure mechsur v'hochiktani. You have to read into the Mishnah as follows. B'shloisha prokim koyanim loisim eskapeim. 3 times a year, where the koyanim do birchas koyanim, kol zman shemispalilim. All the tefillas that they daven on a typical day, it would be shachris and mincha. If there's a musaf, it'll be musaf. V'yesh men arba pomim b'yoyim. And there's even once where they would say the birchas kohanim 4 times in a day. Shachris, musaf, mincha, u'ne'ilas shorim. And that would be on Yom Kippur. Ve'elu en shloisha prokim, these 3 times when one does birchas kohanim, is tainyois, u'mamodois, v'yoyim HaKippurim. Says the Gemara, Omer of Nachman, Omer Rabbi Ba'avua, Zu div Reb Meir. What we just saw in the Mishnah is the opinion of Reb Meir, an anonymous Mishnah. Aval Chachomim Oimrim, the Chachomim say, Shachris Musaf yesh behem nesiyas kapayim, Mincha ne'ilah ein behem nesiyas kapayim. The Chachomim argue with Reb Meir and say that Mincha and ne'ilah, there's never birchas kohanim. Man Chachomim, who are these Chachomim who are arguing with Reb Meir? Says the Gemara, Rabbi Yehuda, it's going to be Rabbi Yehuda in the following brisa. Tanya, Shachris umusaf mincha neila kulon yesh behem nesias kapayim divrei Rabbi Meir. Rabbi Meir learns, like we saw in our Mishnah, that one does birchas kehanim, Shachris, mincha, Shachris, musaf, mincha, and neila. Rabbi Yehuda Omer, Shachris umusaf yesh behem nesias kapayim, mincha neila ein behem nesias kapayim. Rabbi Yehuda argues, as we saw, and says that you only do birchas kehanim, Shachris, and musaf. Only in the morning time. After that, people go home, people eat their meals, they could become intoxicated, and becoming intoxicated will stop the Kohanim from being able to do Birchas Kohanim. Rabbi Yossi Omer, this is a third opinion. Rabbi Yossi says, Ne'ilo yesh bo nesias kapayim. Mincha ein bo nesias kapayim. Now they all agree that a regular mincha, one doesn't do Birchas Kohanim. Only Shachris and Musaf. Why? Because people may become intoxicated. The question is on fast days, where typically on fast days, you can't become intoxicated, you can't drink anything. So the reason not to do Birchas Kohanim falls away, which is indeed why Rabbi Meir says you do Birchas Kohanim even in the afternoon, Mincha Ne'ilah. Rabbi Yehuda said no. Rabbi Yehuda said since every other day in the whole year we don't do Birchas Kohanim, Mincha, and in the afternoon, that's including Ne'ilah, even though there is no Ne'ilah the whole year, you don't do Birchas Kohanim in the afternoon. Rabbi Yossi says that Mincha, that every other mincha you don't do birchas kehanim, so you don't do birchas kehanim on mincha even in these fast days, the mamodos, Yom Kippur and Tainiyos. However, ne'ilah, which there's never ne'ilah besides for these days, and on these days it's not possible to be intoxicated, therefore there's no reason to establish that there should be no birchas kehanim by ne'ilah, so he says by ne'ilah yesh bo nesias kapayim. And that's what the Gemara is about to explain. But my kamifligi, what's the point that they're arguing about? Rabbi Meir Sovar Kol Yoima, every other day, time of my, why do we not loy parosi kohanim yodayu b'mincha? So why do the kohanim every other day not do birchas kohanim by mincha? Mishum shikrus, because of the chance of being intoxicated. Ha'idna, but on a fast day, leka shikrus, there is no intoxication because you can't drink, and therefore there's no reason not to do Birchas Kohanim. Says Rabbi Meir, you do Birchas Kohanim, Shachris, Musaf, Mincha, Ne'ilah. Rabbi Yehuda Sovar, Shachris and Musaf, the Kol Yoim Lo Yishchiach Shekrus, every other day Shachris and Musaf, which is before the time you eat your meal, there's never any risk of intoxication. Lagozru bu Rabbanon, the Rabbanon didn't see it necessary to decree that on a fast day one shouldn't do Birchas Kohanim. Mincha Ne'ilah, however, the tefillas in the second part of the day, the Chol Yom Shchicha Shikrus, it's the time of the day that every other day in the year it is a possibility, and it's even Shechiach is common that people should become intoxicated. Gozubu Rabbanon, the Rabbanon said, don't say Birchas Kohanim even on the fast days. Rabbi Yossi Sova, Rabbi Yossi holds Mincha D'Isya B'Kol Yom, Mincha, which is a tefillah that's said every other day. Gozu Rabbanon, the Chachamim said, every other day you don't do Birchas Kohanim Mincha, you never do Birchas Kohanim Mincha, even on a fast day. Ne'ilah D'Leisa B'Kol Yoma, however, Ne'ilah, which is not a tefillah one davens any other day, Gozu Rabbanon, the Rabbanon said, there's no reason not to do Birchas Kohanim by Ne'ilah. Says the Gemara, Omer of Yudam Marav, Halacha K'Rab Meir. The halacha is like Rab Meir, and we'll soon see that the word halacha means that it's something we're comfortable to publicize, and we're very certain that that is the final halachic ruling, like Rav Meir. Rabbi Yechanan Omar, Rabbi Yechanan says, Nohagu ha'om k'Rab Meir. He doesn't say that halacha is like Rav Meir. He says that the people just, that's the custom they got used to following Rab Meir, that they would do Birchas Kohanim even with Mincha Ne'ilah. Rava Omar, Rava says, Minig k'Rab Meir. He doesn't say that it's just what the people did, Noagu ha'om. He says that is a custom, and a custom that should be encouraged. It's not necessarily a ruling that has to be publicized at first, but anybody who asks the question, what should we do? That is the custom to rule like Reb Meir. So we have three different opinions as to what extent and how certain the halacha is like Reb Meir. Manda Omar halacha Reb Meir, the first opinion who said that halacha like Reb Meir. Dorshina leiba pirka. When we're giving a drasha in public, we get up and we tell everybody the halacha is like Reb Meir. Manda Omar minig, the opinion that says that it was a custom. Midrash le dorshinon. Then we don't go out and publicize it, but iruya moirinon. If somebody asks us what the ruling should be, that's the ruling we give them, that the custom is like Reb Meir. Manda Omar noagu. And the opinion that says it was just something that the people they got used to, which we're not even sure if the halacha is like Rav Meir, it's just something they did on their own accord, and therefore if somebody asks us the question, we will not even tell them this opinion. And if they did Birchas Kehanim, they did Birchas Kehanim, and we don't protest that. Rav Nachman Omar, halacha Rabbi Yosi. Rav Nachman Bechlal says the halacha is like Rabbi Yosi, that one only does Birchas Kehanim, Shachris, Musaf, and Ne'ilah, not Mincha. And the Gemara says, V'halacha Rabbi Yosi, that's the halacha. V'ho'idna, and nowadays, my Tama Parsi Kahana Yodayu b'minchas u'detanisa. If the Gemara just ruled like Rabbi Yosi, and Rabbi Yosi said that you don't say Birchas Kehanim by Mincha even on a fast day, today the custom is on a fast day, we do Birchas Kehanim by Mincha. Says the Gemara, Kiven de b'samoch l'shkias hachama kaparshi, since nowadays they would, unlike back in the days where they would daven mincha much earlier, and that mincha, Rabbi Yosi said that it's a mincha which you do shortly after midday, then the mincha gedola, there you don't do Birchas Kehanim. But today, ha'idna, which the Gemara is talking about, where we daven mincha very late, it's similar, it's the same time as Ne'ilah almost, it's mincha ketana, we do it very close to Shkia, and therefore, ketfilas Ne'ilah damya, it's not similar to a regular mincha that is normally davened, and therefore there's no gezerah, and you can do Birchas Kehanim even during mincha. Says the Gemara, Dekule alma miyas. What do we see from all this? That everybody agrees that shikur osa b'nisiyas kapayim, that a drunk, intoxicated person, a kohen, is not allowed to do Birchas Kehanim. Minohan amili, what would be the source for that? Omer Bishua ben Levi mishum bar kapora. Lama nismecha parashas kohen mevorich. Why is the parasha of Birchas Kehanim written adjacent to the parashas Nazir, the parasha of the Nazir, which is somebody who's not allowed to drink wine? Loimar, to teach us that ma Nazir osir bayayin, in the same way as a Nazir is not allowed to drink wine, af kohen mevorich, so too regarding Birchas Kehanim, osir bayayin, it's also for him to do Birchas Kehanim under the influence of wine. Maskif la avud Reb Zera. So the father of Reb Zera asked the following question. V'omri la Oishia bar Zavda. Others say it was Oishia bar Zavda who asked the question, that if you're comparing Birchas Kehanim and the prohibition of doing Birchas Kehanim under the influence of wine, you're learning that from the fact that it's written next to Nazir, Ima Nazir also b'chartzon, maybe in the same way as a Nazir is not allowed to intake even any grape seeds, af kohen mevorich also b'chartzon, maybe a kohen who wants to do Birchas Kehanim is not allowed to drink, not allowed to eat any of these grape pips either. And we know that's not true. Omer Yitzchok, Omar Kro. No, because we have another pasuk. The pasuk says elsewhere, "Ba'isa hi hivdil Hashem es shevet halevi loses es aroin bris Hashem lamid lifnei Hashem l'shorosoi, to serve Hashem ulevorich b'shmoi, and to bless with Hashem's name." So you see that the service of Hashem, which is what Kohanim are doing, and the making a bracha are compared to each other. They're written near each other. Ma Mashoris, in the same way as a regular Kohen who does the avoid in the Beis Hamikdash, mutar b'chartzon, he's not allowed to drink wine, but he is allowed to drink or to eat the grape pips. Af kohen mevorich, so too the Kohen who's doing Birchas Kehanim, mutar b'chartzon, is only not allowed to drink wine and do Birchas Kehanim under the influence of wine and alcohol, and not allowed to be intoxicated. But to eat chartzon, the pips of the grapes, that's okay. Asks the Gemara, Ima mishras u'mishoris bal mum loy. Are you going to say that in the same way as a kohen who does the avodah, if he's blemished, he's not allowed to do the avodah, af kohen mevorich bal mum loy? Are you going to say that a kohen also, if he's got some form of blemish, he's not allowed to do Birchas Kehanim? Says the Gemara, no. Ha iskish le Nazir. He's compared to Nazir, as we saw before, that the Birchas Kehanim is written next to Nazir. And with Nazir, there's no such restriction. Even somebody who's a Baal Mum can be a Nazir. Asks the Gemara, Umay chozis demakshus lekula, akish lechumra. Why are you comparing to Nazir to say that a Baal Mum is allowed to do Birchas Kehanim? And you're comparing to L'Sharosoi to say that Chartzan is mutar? Maybe you should do the other way around. Compared to Nazir, that Chartzon should be Aser, and compared to the Kohen, that Baal Mum should be Aser. Akish l'chumra. Answers the Gemara, asmachtaninu, because these psukim and the fact that we're learning from that two things are written next to each other, it's not a real biblical drasha. It's just an asmachta, it's just something that the Chachomim were leaning on and depending on and supporting their own rabbinical rulings with these psukim. But it's not really a rabbinical ruling, a biblical ruling, and therefore, since it's midrabanon ulukula, therefore we use it to be lenient and not to be stringent. And in Yirtzeh Hashem, in the next shiur, we're going to continue from here.